Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm Katie Burgess, and together with Louise, we have created this network for psychologists who are on teaching and scholarship or teaching focused contracts. It kind of came about because I was feeling um, kind of alone and like I didn't really know what support or advice to get about my career, and nobody else really within my school knew how to because most people were teaching and research focused, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, and they don't know what scholarship is. Um, so I realized that it's not just me. And I spoke to Louise and I said, wouldn't it be really nice if we had somewhere where people who are psychologists, who are teaching focused, could get together and talk about some of the issues they want to work on, and also just kind of support one another and just form a network and see kind of where it goes from there. So with that, TFun was launched, and we thought a fantastic first person to be speaking with us would be Julie, given she's an expert in scholarship and all things scholarship pathway, and she's a professor on this pathway as well. So I will hand over to Louise, who's going to introduce Julie. And then after Julie's talk, we're going to have a little bit of kind of discussion, question. Yes, Julie equals champion. She's amazing. If you've not experienced Julie before, that's a weird way of saying it, isn't it? But yeah, she is fantastic. She's a real advocate for people on this pathway, and has real insights into all the amazing things we can do as educators. So, Louise, over to you.
All right, hi everyone. It's really nice to see people from all over the country, and a special hello to some colleagues at Brookes who I can see have joined. So please do spread the word, and also welcome to colleagues who are not directly working in psychology but are in other related disciplines. So really warm welcome to you too. Um, yeah, so I'm a fairly recent professor of learning and teaching, or education and student experience, depending on how you kind of want to say it, at Oxford Brookes University. And I'm really excited to be starting this network with Katie. And this is our first event. So I'm now delighted to welcome Professor Julie Hulme. Um, Julie is a Professor of Psychology Education at Nottingham Trent University. And she, as they champions and supports the evidence-based approach to education through scholarship, not just within psychology, but across the university as well. She's a National Teaching Fellow and I think co-chair, are you, of the National Teaching Fellow Association?
Deputy, yeah.
Deputy chair. And Julie's done so his focus is on two things. One is how kind of students learn in psychology, focus on this concept of psychological literacy, but also more broadly, Julie's work is about inclusion and using a social psychological lens to try and understand things like transition to university, access to learning, and student sense of belonging. And she's really committed through all of this in working with students as partners in her approach. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Julie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louise. Excuse me. I always love those introductions because when you say everything like that all in one place, it sounds really like massive, doesn't it? But it's a long time of building this career. And I think, I really resonate with what Katie was saying about feeling very much alone. So back in 2020, maybe, or certainly around that time, I actually wrote a blog called A Maverick in Your Midst, because I felt very much that I wasn't like the other academics. I was in a psychology department in an education focused role, and everybody else cared about research. And I was the one who always put my hand up in departmental meetings and said, what about the students? What about this for the students? What about that for the students? And everybody else would say, but we can't get promoted for that. We do research. That's what we do. Teaching takes time. It's the thing that gets in the way. And I got very frustrated with that and started to think about what does it mean to be an education focused academic? And actually, it must have been before 2020, because I set up a group called Professors in Preparation, which isn't just about being a professor, but it's generally being recognized for the work that you're doing on an education focused track. And I set that up in 2018 with the wonderful Debbie Locke. So I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and it seems to me that in the last couple of years, people have started to really kind of get to grips with this conversation that I was having all on my own for a long time. And my thinking was, well, okay, there's me on my own. And then I started to find, oh, there's other people who also think they're on their own, and they also think they're mavericks and they're a bit weird for talking about students. Started to build networks. And now I'm sort of seeing more and more of those networks starting to appear. And it's really lovely. I'm really grateful to Katie and Louise for setting up TFun, because I think psychology has some really extra value to add to education-focused careers, because of course we know about learning, we know about individual differences, we know about research methods. You know, we can do some really good work around what we do in teaching and learning using our discipline background. So I'm really pleased to see this network. So thank you, Katie and Louise, for setting us up. So today I'm going to talk about scholarship. And I'm going to talk in quite a sort of broad way, but also quite a story-focused way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the things I do, not because I think I get everything right, but because it's one way of thinking about how we can build these careers. And this is how I did it. And this is how I got to be a professor of psychology education. And I should say that actually, I spent a long time trying to be a professor, failing dismally at being a professor, couldn't get there, got blocked multiple times, thought I would probably never get there and resigned myself to that. And then Nottingham Trent had this moment of inspiration where they decided they wanted education-focused professor in psychology to help support this kind of work focusing on education and scholarship. So I'm incredibly lucky to work in a place that values education, values scholarship, and is really foresighted in that. So a big thanks to them as well, I suppose, really. But yes, so I'm going to talk about building and developing your profile, because one of the things that people tell me, you're teaching focused, you're spending most of your life in a classroom doing the teaching. How on earth do you build this kind of profile that people expect you to have if you're going to be a professor? You can't be a professor of teaching. How on earth do you do that? So this is how I've done it. That was a long introduction for one slide, wasn't it? I've put my email address there. You're very welcome to get in touch with me. And my Blue Sky address. I'm moving away from Twitter. I haven't quite Twexited yet, but I've nearly Twexited. So sexited, I don't know how do we say this, but yes, I'm moving to Blue Sky, so I've put my Blue Sky address on there as well. So that didn't work. There we go. So I'm going to focus a little bit on talking about what education focused careers are, because I think they come in different shapes and sizes. And it helps us to understand a little bit what we're all doing and how we fit into the sector. And yes, absolutely, Andy, the fact that, you know, students bring in such a huge proportion of our income and are really important to university business, and yet somehow they get underrated compared to the importance of research in many institutions. So yeah, I'm going to start by talking about education-focused careers and the different shapes that they take around the sector. I'm going to talk about a bit of an overview of what I do and how I do it and why I do it. And then I'm going to bring in this idea of bog-off scholarship. Now, some of you have heard me talk about this before. If you were at DartP last week, you heard a little bit of this. The idea of buy one, get one free. So if you go to the supermarket and you buy a packet of cereal and get a yogurt free, you get best value from these bog-off deals. So I'm going to talk about how we can bog off our teaching and scholarship and hopefully still have a life outside work, which seems kind of important to me. So academic staff in UK universities, this is HESA data that was reported in Wonky. And what we know is that the numbers of what HESA call teaching only staff have been increasing, both in terms of numbers and in terms of proportions since 2012. So this is now in excess of 240,000 teaching focused staff, or teaching only staff as HESA call them, in the sector. And that's the bottom pale green band. And I've just written the percentages on there a little bit bigger so you can see them a bit more clearly. It's the bottom pale green band. So you can see in 2018-19, 30.5% of us in the sector. And by the time we get to 22-23, 35.6% in the sector. So the numbers and proportions of teaching focused staff has increased. There's lots of reasons for that. Some of it is none too pretty. So some of it might be about, for example, staff that are underperforming according to university criteria and definitions of what performance should be around the ref, and they want to remove them from their ref statistics, partly because, as Patrick says, the NSS, student fees, all of that's really important to university economically and in terms of recruitment. And so bringing in some teaching focused people is a way of trying to look after your students and improve education. Lots and lots of different reasons. But it's really interesting to note the nomenclature that HESA uses. So according to HESA, you can be employed as the top orange line there, the very, very thin orange line across the top of the bars.
I'll just pause you a sec, Julie. Can people, just to check if people can see the slides? Can people see the slides? It just I know one person okay, they can. So maybe I know there might be one or two people having difficulty seeing. It might be a case of trying another tab, but they are there and we can see them.
Back up again. Are they there now?
No, it's not. Yes, I think people can see them, Julie. It's just one, looks like one or two couldn't, but it seems like others can. So it might just be an individual glitch. But no,
I don't know if you can share the file in the chat, Louise, but if you can, then feel free, because I'm going to suggest you share the slides anyway, because they've got hyperlinks in so people can follow the links. So if you can share the slides, feel free to pop them in the meeting chat.
Will do.
Yes, actually, I had been reading, I guess I excluded this too, but this should also not be excluded, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. I'm going to carry on if that's okay. And Louise, you could maybe sort of send the slides out on email or something then. Yeah, sorry. I think Patrick, you put your thumb up, you can see them, so I'm definitely sharing them.
Yeah, I can see them, no problem.
Cool. Okay, I'm sorry for those who can't. Thank you, Andy. So Andy says he can see them as well. Okay. Yeah, so the top line on the bar charts here. So basically what we can see is dates by year across the x-axis, and then on the y-axis we've got the number of people on each type of contract. So the very top line, which is a very thin line, is people who do neither teaching nor research. And when you dig into this, you find out that these are people like vice chancellors and pro vice chancellors, and it's a tiny number and a tiny proportion of university staff who apparently, based on HESA's description, don't do anything at all, because they don't do teaching and they don't do research. So maybe they don't exist, or they just occupy space in the university now. I'm sure our vice chancellors and pro vice chancellors work very hard. The next band down is the yellow band, and this is around about, in 2018-19, it was 23% of university staff. By 2022-23, it was almost 21%, so it's dropped a little bit. And these are research only staff. So these are staff who are only employed to do research. The dark green underneath that is the next band, and this is the biggest band. So in 2018-19, we're talking 45% of our colleagues were, well done, Louise, thank you very much. 45% of our colleagues in 2019 were on teaching and research contracts, through to almost 43% in 2022-23. So they've gone down slightly as well, teaching and research. And then at the bottom, we've got these teaching only staff. Teaching only, and we're growing and expanding in numbers and proportion. Now, I don't know about you, I take quite a serious objection to being teaching only. I don't know anybody who only teaches. So I'm going to dispute with Hisa for a little while. Do you know anybody who only teaches? All they do from morning till night is they teach students. I don't know anybody that fits that description. So here at NTU, we have two different teaching focused pathways, or teaching only focused according to Hisa, where we have teaching and practice. So these are people who've come in from, for example, psychological practice like clinical psychology or community psychology or counselling psychology or whatever. And then others who are on teaching and scholarship like me, where we focus on all things education. So I do teaching, but I also do the scholarship of higher education. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that involves in a minute. At Keele, where I used to work, we had education and scholarship pathways. I was on the promotions panel at the University of Lincoln, and their pathway is teaching, scholarship and professional practice. So they put all of their people who are doing scholarship and or thinking about how do you bring professional practice into the classroom on one pathway. And I've just been on Manchester's working group to revise their teaching and scholarship pathway. So as a visiting fellow at the University of Manchester, and they also have a teaching and scholarship pathway. So most people, contractually at least, have an and. But even if there isn't an and in the contract, you tend to find that people are doing more than just the teaching. They don't just teach. So, and you can see here, this is quite a variety of different university types. So NTU is a very large post-92. Keele is a small pre-92. Jamie says in Exeter, it's education and scholarship, so the same as at Keele. Lincoln is a post-92, but much smaller than NTU. And Manchester's a big Russell Group university. So they all have similar themes running. So my argument is there's nearly always an and. Brooks has the education and student experience pathway. But occasionally you do have a contract that says you're teaching only. So I had two teaching only contracts. I was a teaching fellow from 2002 to 2004. I was still finishing my PhD in this time. Birmingham education focused. And that's my preferred terminology, actually, but because it catches the and. In Leicester, it's called teaching focused. But yeah, so I had two teaching only contracts. So I was just finishing off my PhD, and a psychology department that was really struggling with student retention, lots of withdrawals in first year, absolutely horrendous withdrawal statistics, employed me as a teaching fellow to try and solve the student retention issue. Not quite sure why they thought a PhD student was the person to fix this, but that's what they did. They employed me. And in the first year of that job, I halved withdrawals from the psychology course. So, you know, it may have been a slightly odd decision to pull in a PhD student, but they got one who set their head to it and managed to work out what some of the problem was. Actually, students wanted to be listened to and heard and seen. It's not a new problem. In 2015 to 16, I was employed as a senior teaching fellow. And there, my job was teaching, but also, while you're at it, could you also transform everything we do around teaching and learning and our teaching provision to improve the student experience, because our NSS scores are through the floor? And could you be director of education and manage everything and do all the quality assurance, please? And could you do some staff development for us? And could you take on some university level roles? So my job was teaching only, but actually I was doing an awful lot more than just teaching. And in that second job as a senior teaching fellow, I was basically, I was on the school senior management team and you know, leading what was happening within that school. So there's no such thing as teaching only, whatever Hisa might call us. And I think that, you know, we need to think about what we do alongside our teaching, because actually there was a paper published not long ago called "You Can't Be Promoted for Just Teaching." And I do think, sadly, that that's probably true, just teaching, although just teaching is a big underestimation of what we do when we're teaching. Standing in a classroom and delivering material on its own won't get us promoted, even if we do it really, really well. But the ands are where we can see the value in what we bring to our universities alongside the teaching, and it's often what the universities are looking for. So when they want to promote somebody to a high level, generally they want to see some externality. They want to see some reputation beyond the university in which we're actually doing the teaching. So what's your and? That's my first question. And you might want to pop some of your thoughts into the chat. And sometimes your and might be, for example, I know, Katie, you're on a teaching and scholarship pathway, but some of you might be doing something like, really good personal tutoring, or solving the black-white awarding gap or the disabled student awarding gap, or working out how to engage students in on-campus teaching activities post-COVID and in a cost of living crisis when students perhaps aren't so keen to come in. So what are you doing? Sorry. Okay. So yeah, what are you doing? What's your and? Because quite often the and is where the expertise lies. The and is the thing that you know things about that other people probably would benefit from knowing about. It's where your expertise is. So, quite often we can look in the mirror and say, am I an expert? And we can't tell. We can't tell the difference. But actually, if we think about what we're doing, we think about the problems that we're solving and the areas that we're actually seeing as part of our day job, supporting our students so that they don't feel like they need to drop out of university. That's something that I became very expert in. So Helen, you're an expert, or your and is research and implementation of an agreed approach to develop or improve induction and transition for first-year students in a business school. What a fantastic and what a difference you're making to your students in that. And you will be becoming very expert because of all the time you spend thinking about it. So often we struggle to see our own and our own expertise. Thank you for sharing yours, Helen. If anybody else wants to pop one in the chat, that would be good. You're getting a round of applause from somebody there, Helen. But the other thing that we can do is we can ask somebody else, because often when we look in the mirror, I tend to focus on, oh my goodness, my hair's gone frizzy, or, oh, I've got a bit of a shiny nose, or whatever it might be, we focus in on something about ourselves that maybe we don't like, and we don't focus in on what everybody else sees. So actually, having a conversation with somebody else and saying, what do I know about? What am I good about? What do I stand for? Why do I matter in this place that I'm teaching? Can be a really good way, because other people, our critical friends, are really good at spotting our expertise. At Birmingham, Anchor says there's something about pedagogic research, and the and has been improving assessment and feedback. The OU, it's something to do with scholarship that's assumed in a teaching context. And yes, Helen, there's always lots of teaching. Anna is using psychology knowledge to help staff work together in teams with different backgrounds, with a focus on being compassionate to each other. What a fantastic thing to be working on, and such a psychological thing. Supporting neurodiverse and international students as a specialism. Exactly that. And we can call it whatever we like. We can call it expertise, we can call it a specialism, we can call it the day job. But it is actually something that we know more about than somebody else. So this is something that I wrote back in 2022. I wrote a chapter about being an education-focused psychology academic. Great Jamie's working in diversity work and student employability outcomes, and I've focused in there as well sometimes, Jamie. So yeah, this is something in 2022 that I wrote in this chapter for education-focused academics. Leading effective educational change requires educational expertise. People say psychology, oh, isn't that just common sense? And they say the same about pedagogy. Isn't that just common sense? Don't you just need to do the things that are common sense? Well, no, actually, we know that psychology can be really counterintuitive. Students learn most, perhaps, when they're feeling a little bit uncomfortable and a bit uncertain, not when they're smiling. And yet we often measure satisfaction. Yeah, psychological safety, really important for us and our students. Yeah. So yeah, we're well, I've lost myself. I've distracted myself with the chat, folks. Where was I? Yes, so I was focusing on this idea of being an education-focused academic, and particularly in psychology, we get this psychological knowledge that we can draw on. But actually, educational expertise isn't very much about common sense, and it is about looking to the evidence in the same way that psychology is counterintuitive, pedagogy can be too. And actually looking at the evidence base tells us what works far more reliably than just sitting down and thinking, well, this seems like a problem, we'll see how we go about it. And actually, I've heard some really bizarre examples of how people are going to improve student experience that just don't look at evidence over my years in this profession. So yeah, educational expertise, where do we find it? Well, we find it in those who choose to study it, who study education and teaching and learning and assessment and team working and all of those things. That's where our educational expertise is, not particularly generally in our traditional discipline-specific researchers. You know, if you're working in cognitive psychology, then you know about your specific area of cognitive psychology. You may be able to apply that to learning and teaching, but you may not. You know, if you're looking at EEG readings and brain activity during sleep, how do you bring that into the classroom? You can teach about it, but it's not educational expertise. So I took a position that education-focused academics, and I talk about education-focused because I think it's more than teaching. It's teaching and student support and assessment and course design and curriculum development and all of those things. Education-focused academics are frequently positive disruptors. And if ever you see my bio out there in the world, I nearly always say, Julie describes herself as a positive disruptor. Because I think as someone who focuses on education, my responsibility is to put my hand up sometimes and say, but what about the students? But what about inclusion? But what about accessibility? But what about developing employable skills? But what about? And so I very often will rock the boat a little bit. Somebody was telling me the other day that the trick is to rock the boat without falling out, which I rather liked. And I tried to do that. And I actually said in my job interview at Nottingham Trent, I said, you know, that's how I describe myself, as a positive disruptor. So if you don't want somebody who will ask you the uncomfortable questions, please don't give me a job, because you're not going to shut me up or you're not going to stop me doing it. And they still gave me the job. So yay, happy about that. But yes, so I think there's a role for us all as positive disruptors. And one of the things that we do as part of these types of role is scholarship. And quite a few of you have said part of your job is scholarship, but often universities are not very clear about what scholarship is, and they're not very clear about how to do it, and they don't always give people time to do it. So one of the things that I've been positively disrupting in thinking about scholarship is trying to make it inclusive, broad, and sustainable, something that people can do alongside their teaching without having to sort of think, oh, now I've got to put my teaching down and try and write a paper in 3 minutes because that's all I've got before my next meeting. And we can't do that. So trying to think about what is scholarship and how can we deliver it in a way that is manageable and that fits into our work and life appropriately. So I start out with Trigwell, because Trigwell back in 2013 was the first person to say scholarship has a contested definition. And since then, lots of people who look at scholarship have jumped up and down and said, but we can't actually decide what it is because it has a contested definition. And Trigwell said so in 2013. Well, he did, but he also said, actually, it has 3 things in common. It's always about improving and enhancing teaching, learning, assessment, things to do with higher education. It's about evaluating and determining quality in some way, and it's evidence-based and systematic. So to me, we can capture that quite easily in saying it's about studying higher education and working out what works in higher education. It could be your and. So if you're trying to work out how to get your students to engage, how to enhance GOS, graduate outcome survey data, if you're trying to work out how to be inclusive for disabled students, which was one of my ands, then these all fit into scholarship. The topic of scholarship is to do with higher education. Love that, Tom. Thank you. However, scholarship also has some other features. Scholarship means going meta. So here's a quote from Hutchings and Schulman that I've taken this from. A scholarship of teaching is not synonymous with excellent teaching. Remember, just teaching won't get you promoted. It's not just teaching well. Some of my research colleagues teach really well. They very rarely get promoted for their teaching. They get promoted for their research. So scholarship is the thing that we look to, and it requires a kind of going meta in which faculty, staff, frame and systematically investigate questions related to student learning, the conditions under which it occurs, what it looks like, how to deepen it, and so forth. And to do so with an eye, not only to improving their own classroom, but to advancing practice beyond it. So I think this is where we start to see the shift between teaching. I'm solving the problem with my own students. I've got my own students coming in and they're engaging, even though in other universities we're seeing empty lecture theatres. Yeah. The reason it becomes scholarship is partly because I'm taking it out and offering it to other people. I'm giving it away. Yeah, I'm saying, here you go, Katie, you can have my teaching idea and you can put it into practice. So you can improve your classroom practices too. And then a quote from Schulman alone, and I love this quote. This is one of my favourite quotes. An act of intelligence or artistic creation becomes scholarship when it has three attributes. It becomes public, it becomes an object of critical review and evaluation by members of one's community. And members of one's community begin to use, build upon, and develop these acts of mind and creation. So we're taking our ideas, our creativity, our thinking, our literature searching, all of the things we're doing to develop this expertise, we're taking it out into the public. Now, that doesn't have to be a journal article. That can be a podcast. That can be a blog. That can be anything you want it to be. Yeah, but it's out in the public domain. It could be a sculpture. Yeah, it could be anything. It could be an interpretive dance, to use the old cliched analogy. But it's the object of critical and review and evaluation. So other people can comment on it. Now, this doesn't have to be the formal peer review that we all meet in research, where you do a piece of research and reviewer 2 comes back and says, well, I wouldn't have done that study that way. It doesn't have to be that kind of peer review. It can be, I published a wonky article and got about half a dozen comments where people were saying, oh, but that's not how it works in my institution. Oh, but I'm not sure I agree with that. Yeah, people comment on public facing materials, and I can then refine my thinking and they can refine their thinking based on that dialogue. So it doesn't have to be a formal peer review process to be review. And then members of one's community begin to use, build upon, and develop. So this, to me, is the same as that, not only improving your own classroom, but advancing practice beyond it. So it's public, people are commenting and reviewing it, and then people are trying it out, using it, refining it, developing it, turning it into their own thing. And that is where impact lies in a teaching career. So when our researcher friends talk about their career development, they talk pounds publication and PhD students quite often, but they also talk in ref terms about reach and citations, and they talk about impact and where they're making a difference in usually policy or community settings, or somebody used this idea of mine to develop something new, knowledge exchange and things like that. We have reach in terms of people being able to see our work, just the same as the researchers do. And our impact is about seeing things changing in higher education, seeing other people's practice developing. So I'm a bit of a magpie, and my ands have been varied and diverse over the years. I have done so many different things because I go, oh, that's a really interesting thing. It's shiny, shiny. I'm really interested in, oh, this thing called psychological literacy and how we can make psychology education useful for students and valuable. I'm really interested in inclusive education, and particularly for disabled students who I think can be very, very excluded from education sometimes. But then I also spotted this bit of a issue around education-focused colleagues feeling a bit minoritized and marginalized within the academic community. And I thought, oh, I ought to do something around reward and recognition for them. And then I've done things on transitions, and I've done things on feedback on assessment and decolonizing and all sorts of things, because I tend to go, oh, shiny, shiny, interesting thing, and pick up a whole new project. So I am a magpie. And I think to create a career profile, you need to be developing a golden thread and a narrative. So for me, my narrative is driven by my values. My values are about higher education is transformative, and everybody who is touched by higher education should have that opportunity to experience transformation. And for me, that means my students through the curriculum that they study, hence psychological literacy, through being included and belonging and mattering to their institutions, so the inclusive education, to my colleagues who sometimes feel marginalized because they're education focused, and looking at all the different stages of learning and teaching. So I have a narrative that fits very much around my values. I'm doing some work with a colleague called Ricky G at NTU at the moment, and we're talking about education focused academics very often feel that they're part of an economy of care. So they've had some sort of marginalized experience as a student. So I was a mum of a 4-month-old baby, working class first in family student, yada, yada, yada. Challenges around my own higher education, and then wanting my students to have a better time than I did and make the world better for them. So paying it forward, if you like, of having this sort of compassion for others. And often education-focused academics talk about that economy of care. So how to grow a bug-off system, buy one, get one free. Well, I started out teaching. That was what I did a lot of, teaching. And many of my students were disabled, and some were marginalized in other ways as well, and of course intersectionality and all the rest of it. But disabled students started with the young lady at the bottom of that slide. Stacey Lyons was my PhD student, but she was also she was my final year project student, and she came to me and she said, Julie, I want to study disabled students' experiences at university. And I said, okay, let's do that. Final year project makes a lot of sense. She then told me that she'd been to see lots of other people, and they'd said, oh, but I think it might be a bit too much work to supervise you because she's registered blind and she's a guide dog user. How am I going to work with you? So people had turned her away on the grounds of her disability, and that really struck me. And then gradually, yeah, Andy, sorry, it really happened. Gradually word got around that Julie does work with disabled students, and being disabled and doing a project on disabled students is actually a real positive, because you can talk to people and they understand that you understand, and it opens up the participant pool and it gives you access, and you can have much more meaningful and understanding conversations, and the research is better. So I became a bit of an ally to my disabled student community. Pippa Hamilton was both an undergraduate and an MSc student with me who had chronic illness, or has chronic illness, and had been told that she would never be able to go to university because she was disabled and couldn't attend university. And she's blogged about that in public. So I'm not giving away any top secret confidences here. Emma Crabb, also a student who worked with me on her final year project and her MSc project at university, very interested in experiences of autistic students and neurodivergent students. So gradually I started to build this reputation of being an ally to disabled students. And I also started to get really, really interested in this. So Stacey went off and did an MSc somewhere else, had a pretty terrible time, and came back and did her PhD with me. And I gathered a whole collection of undergraduate MSc and PhD students, built an MS team and said, right, let's have conversations about disability and experiences and what we can do to make the world a more inclusive place. So the first thing that came out of that was a co-authored paper with Pippa in Disability and Society, which is a quartile 1 disability studies journal about experiences of higher education for students with chronic illnesses. So that's a 2023 reference. It's already had 47 citations and it's first authored by an undergraduate student. Good for her, good for me, and good for our other co-author. That one output and the lab generally grew and fed into a whole load of other experiences for all of us. So I very much found myself learning from my students, really getting interested in this, became a bit of a disability champion, set up a disability steering group for the university that was led by disabled students, and I was the administrator for it because I wanted to facilitate, but I didn't want to be the voice. So all sorts of things happening. And you can see all of these different outputs that have come from that work within the space of a couple of years. So we wrote a case study for TASO, which is the Transforming Access to Student Outcomes group. We wrote, Stacey and I gave a talk at NTU about different theories, so mixing up psychology and disability studies as a way to work. The ANTF, thinking about, helping people to think about how can they work with disabled students and amplify their voices rather than it being their voice, the staff member's voice. Stacey and I wrote a wonky article which got picked up by some senior leaders across the university sector who got in touch and said, well, how can we make our universities more inclusive? Did a podcast with Lucinda Powell for Changing States of Mind, which is sponsored by the BPS. And I wrote on my own blog, there's no such thing as the student voice, listening to the throng. I get really fed up with people talking about the student voice, like there's one voice, the student voice says. And I'm now collaborating with some colleagues at Keele University around a project called Autistic Voices in Geosciences. So this is just growing and growing and growing, and it's like a snowball, it just keeps getting bigger. And so what I guess I'm trying to say here is that, you can be doing your teaching, and when you're thinking about your teaching, you can turn that into scholarship outputs. It doesn't have to be a whole separate thing that, oh, I'm going to do a research project. It might be, or it might be a final year project. You might combine it with your teaching. There might be ways to do that. So this is Kern et al.'s Dimensions of Activity Relating to Teaching. And the emphasis here is really on this scholarship of teaching and learning. So they're saying that you need to be public and systematic in your work. And that puts you up in that top right corner with your pedagogic research, meta-analyses, literature reviews, published case studies, things like that. I actually think that all of these different types of activities link together. And we actually need to be doing all of them, because if you're writing papers, then maybe half a dozen academics will read your paper and they'll be interested, but they were already interested. And the people that you need to change their minds, if you go back to the idea of positive disruption, writing for Wonky, writing for Times Higher Education Campus, writing for HEPI, writing a blog of your own, that's where people find your work and go, oh, I never thought of it that way. And that's where you make a difference. So I actually think we need to be doing all of this, and the scholarship that we do that might be in a published journal article needs to come back into our teaching practice. So I actually think we need to join this loop up. So I have got a paper which I hope will be out soon. It's currently under review, where we've kind of rewritten this model, but it gives you a way to think about where you are. Are you private, doing your teaching in your own classroom, or are you public, taking it out to the world? Are you doing it systematically, evidence-based, or are you doing it relatively informally? So you could sort of map where you are, but I think you need to be doing a little bit of all of that. The other way that I bog off my scholarship is that if I give a talk and it's recorded, as this is, I will put a link to this talk on my own blog site, Higher Psych Ed. And that means I get an extra output. I get a blog output as well as a talk output, and people can find it. So really easy way to just get an extra bit of profile and a bit of reach for your work. So I've done that with those two there. You can link to the podcast on changing states of mind, and a talk that included quite a few of my students there that's on YouTube and linked from my blog. So again, just maximizing reach by thinking about how can I, buy one, get one free? How can I get the most value out of this thing that I'm doing? So I think the bog off model really is about thinking about what's the evidence that underpins the decisions that you're making. So if you're thinking about how do I close the black-white awarding gap, one of the first things that you might do is talk to other people, and then you might go off and read a bit of literature, and there's absolutely nothing to stop you writing something about the evidence that you've found, literature review, critical discussion, thought piece, whatever, and there's an output for you. There's some scholarship. You then start to produce things. So you might produce some teaching toolkits for your colleagues. You might produce some handouts for your students. You might produce some recorded talks for people to listen to, whatever they might be. They're products, they're resources, and you can turn them into open educational resources, and you can share them on things like the National Teaching Repository or Open Learn Connect. I think Open Learn Share, maybe, but Open Learn anyway, you can share things there. So you can actually turn your teaching resources and notes and things into an open educational resource that you can share. Then you can actually give it a go, try it out, evaluate it, and write some outputs around whether it worked or not. And that might be a journal article, but it might also be a article for the Psychologist, for example. And I think sometimes the thing that I hear from a lot of my education-focused colleagues is a real sense of humility, where people don't want to know what I think. People don't want to see these resources, these outputs. Well, I think we can reframe that. So Martinovich et al. In 2022 talked about scholarship as an act of generosity. If you've just spent the last year of your life desperately trying to unravel all the intricacies of student intersectionality and how on earth you're going to close an awarding gap, then your colleagues do want to know about it, and you can save them some grappling time. So get it out there, do them a favour, and maybe they'll solve a different problem that you need to solve next. So seeing this as community sharing rather than bigging yourself up. And you can write about the fact that actually I've done this and I don't know if it's good yet. And I'm still trying to learn and I'm still thinking. And that's fine as well. We can be honest and authentic because that's what we tend to be as education-focused academics. So I'm asking you, where's your bog off opportunity? It's probably the same place as your and. It's where you're an expert and you've done some thinking. And then you could start using that for reward and recognition. And often when I talk about reward and recognition, I talk about promotion because that's where I started thinking. But also you get these invitations, you get potentially international invitations. I was in Prague over the summer talking about psychological literacy and competencies that are gained in psychology education. You can use it for your fellowship of the HEA or whichever category you're looking. There's national teaching fellowships and CATE awards, which are team-based awards. DART-P, the BPS DART-P, offer the Higher Education Psychology Teacher of the Year award. What works for you? Think about where you might fit. Do you meet those criteria? And for all of them, you need to make a claim of expertise. So I'm afraid you have to get off your humble pie and say, here I am, and I'm an expert, which can be painful and uncomfortable. We have to make a claim of expertise and usually pull it together in a narrative that talks about your reach and your impact and why people can care, because it's about value of what you're doing. You know, if I set up a university origami group, that's all very well, but if nobody really benefits from doing origami, I can talk about having reach. Everybody in the university knows about it. I can talk about having impact. There's a workshop running every week where everybody can come and do origami, but if it's not valued, then it doesn't matter. So it needs to have something that's meaningful. And then finally, we're here for each other. So this is a lovely quote from Steve McCanwell, which I love. Relatively few teaching-focused staff in more senior positions who can review, mentor, and support teaching staff. And this is what Katie was talking about at the beginning, feeling on her own. They need to act as role models for junior staff and help individuals to collate evidence. So the metrics, the quotes, all of those things that help people to evidence their teaching achievements. I would argue that, yes, there are relatively few, or very few actually, senior education-focused staff, but we can also peer support. And so Profs in Prep was set up when I was still a reader, so the equivalent of Associate Prof, with the view that I could be a critical friend to somebody else who was looking for promotion. They didn't have to be a prof to support me. We could all support each other. And that works really well. So it's about finding your network, finding your tribe. And Katie and Louise have given us a platform here where we can do that. We can find like-minded people who care about the things that we do and can be that mirror for us to say, okay, you can't see your expertise, but I can see your expertise. And here are some of those networks. And they're all hyperlinked, so you can find out more by clicking on the links. Louise has popped these into the chat. If you can't see a network that you like, start your own, like Katie's done and Louise has done. But also think about why you're doing it. It does help you to collaborate. You start to hear about what other people are doing. You can disseminate your work. So I can put this down as an output on my CV. I gave a talk to TFun, National Reach. I can see it being evaluated and impacted, having impact maybe, and maybe some of you will get in touch in 12 months' time and tell me, you know, I went to your TFun talk and since then I've done this, that and the other, and I've got promoted, or I've got a national teaching fellowship, or I've won Heptotty for DART-P, or whatever it might be. But also you get new opportunities, you get invitations. You know, somebody might want me to come and give a talk like this to your department. That's fine, I can do that. Raises my profile. So eventually somebody will say, that Julie Hulme, what does she stand for? Oh, she does stuff around scholarship, doesn't she? Yeah, people know me outside my own university. But also if I put in for a promotion and I want support for that at any point, then I've got a pool of peer reviewers that I can send my work out to. I've got people who can be my referees and my assessors. So that's the kind of value of networks. And I think I've grown my career through networks. I've networked incredibly well, and I've really leveraged the power of networking. So think about where your and is, what topic is where your expertise is, what actions can you take to make your scholarship visible and impactful, but also who can help you, because often collaboration is where that sweet spot is. I'm not good at statistics. I like quali methods. Sometimes I need a statistician to work with me. I'm not too worried about writing journal articles. I've got a colleague who's been more worried about writing journal articles, but I've had to learn by collaboration to write in the way that the media likes. When we work together, we share the workload, we make it easier to actually get the work done, but we also share different skill sets and strengths. So think about who can help. And then finally, anything else that you want to think about? What are you going to do next? So that's me. And thank you. I hope that was useful.
Thanks so much, Julie. Yes, so inspiring as usual. I've seen a couple of comments already saying like this is really inspiring, and hopefully it's been really helpful for people to, you know, think about their careers, think about what you're doing, what's your why, what's your thing, really. And so, does anyone have any questions for Julie to start off with? Yes, Anchor?
So this is a little bit of an odd question. I used to work in post-92 institutions where the teaching practices are amazing on the whole. And then I moved into a Russell Group. And while the Russell Group is full of its own importance as an educational, no, not an educational institution, as a research institution, and they talk about research focused and all that a lot, and I talk about research informed teaching a lot, but they don't inform their research with pedagogic teaching a lot. So what I've been spending my every waking minute on for the last 12, 14 years is trying to drag a Russell Group into the 21st century when it comes to things like the use of rubrics, the use of consistent feedback practices, etc. So I feel like even though I have made huge progress, it's all out there already. Everybody's done it already for the last 400 years. It's just us who are limping behind. Have you got any advice for
What a fantastic
reaching
question.
out?
What a fantastic question. I mean, one of the things that I've done, because I've worked in research intensive places as well. One of the things that I think is really important, we've got a few people here who are in Russell Group institutions. One thing is you can write about the challenges of working in a Russell Group institution, and that's not to be underestimated. But also I think, you know, you can't do everything yourself. So pick the battle that you think is the most important one, and then do things to bring other people in. So if your thing is about assessment rubrics, bring in somebody who's really good at assessment rubrics and get them to give a research talk. Because people come to research talks, don't they, Katie? Katie got me in to do exactly that. She got me to come and talk about the importance of education-focused careers in a university at Cardiff. So that's one of the ways that Katie and I got to know each other so well. Bring people in, find your allies. Again, your network is a group of people who understand. I mean, I know we've got quite a few people in Russell Group universities here. What would you say?
I would say that I agree with everything Anka just said. I used to work in Liverpool John Moores University, which is a post 92. And then I came to work at Exeter, research intensive, elite university, so far behind on teaching methods and the technology, on everything. All we have is a reputation sometimes, I think, but you never heard me say that out loud, even though it's recorded. But yeah, that's exactly my experience. So I was nodding along with everything that you said there, Anka, about that. So I've got another example of this. So I teach research statistics to the undergraduate students. And so we just recently moved over to Jamovi. And we're acting as if the move to Jamovi is this brand new thing. The Russell Group is only just doing this. The post-92s did this about 6 years ago. So it's kind of like giving yourself a pat on the back while you're turned in the opposite direction from all the other universities that have already done that. So yes, heavily resonate with that.
Although I would also say that the University of Glasgow has absolutely led the way on moving to R. You know, I mean, we've done things at NTU, and other universities have done quite a lot around this as well. But Glasgow have really put themselves out there with their Teach R resources. You know, and they're an ancient university. So actually, sometimes the Russell Group can do these things. And I think, you know, sometimes we create almost an artificial divide between the post-92s and the ancient and the old. And it's not always the case. So, you know, working with Manchester, I see some really, really good forward thinking in Manchester sometimes, you know. It's not the case necessarily that it's always the Russell Group being crusty and old and staying behind and the post-92s trailblazing. But I think, you know, whenever you meet resistance, there's lessons to learn. One is, can you find the way through? So I'll tell you a story about working in a university, which will remain nameless. And the university had said, we need to roll out lecture capture across all of our teaching and learning. And the university colleagues that I was working with at the time kicked off really big, major storm, to the point that one of my colleagues said, "That's a breach of my human rights." Yeah, to say that I have to record my lectures. You're breaching my human rights. I will sue if you do this. Now, the university had a top-down decision. Everybody will use lecture capture. I was in a position of authority. And I was the person who the university said could exempt you from doing lecture capture if there were good reasons. So if, for example, you were talking about something that might be confidential. I don't know why you'd talk about something confidential in front of a crowd of students, but apparently some people do. Then I could say, oh no, you don't need to record that because it's for, it's a sensitive thing. So I just said, right, I'm giving you all exemption. I'm not going to fight you on this. You all have exemption. You don't have to record your lectures, but I'm going to record my lectures. And a few other people have said that they're going to. And by the end of year one, we were up to about 60% compliance. By the end of year two, we had 100% compliance, including the colleague who said it was a breach of his human rights, because the students had all been to classes where lectures were captured and said, why doesn't everybody do this? And they went to the colleagues that weren't recording and said, why aren't you doing this? And they couldn't answer because students don't believe in things like that being a breach of their human rights. And it sounded a bit, So we were the only school in the university that had 100% compliance with lecture capture. And I think it's because sometimes instead of saying, we have to do this, you find a way to negotiate and to influence and persuade. And sometimes the students will do that work for you. So if you can get 3 people, 3 module leaders in your department to put in assessment rubrics and the students like them, the students will campaign for you. Then you can get somebody to come in and say, here's the evidence that this works, and talk about it in a psychologically informed, researchy type way. And they go, oh, hold on, there's evidence for this. The students are pushing for it. I'm getting loads of stick in my module evaluations because I'm not doing it. And gradually, actually, you can move things. But I think sometimes we can get very frustrated because people don't move quick enough. And my response to that is even a dripping tap will fill a bath.
Thanks so much, Julie. I think I also didn't express my question very clean. I have managed to get the rubrics pushed through. It's happening. We've had a massive increase in NSS, but I don't know what forum I can share this in to blow my own trumpet because everybody else has already done it. That was kind of the point I was most frustrated with, like the Jamovi point that Jamie made. We have the same situation as well. But thank you. What you said about making it happen, really, really good advice. Thank you.
But I also think you can talk about how did you make that happen in a resistant environment, and that's very different. So to say I brought in Jamovi or I brought in assessment rubrics in an institution that didn't want Jamovi or assessment rubrics, and then I brought in an assessment rubric to test how students were using Jamovi, that in itself, overcoming change resistance is a key part of higher education. So reflect on that and write about it and write about what you learned about leading in higher education. It doesn't have to be something brand new and radical. It can be, I moved people who weren't happy and I got them to be happy eventually.
That's a really good point.
Thank you, Julie. Robin, did you want to come in with your question?
Yeah, it was a somewhat different topic. So you gave this sort of this definition of scholarship that it could basically be anything, so long as it's sort of public and available for criticism.
And focus on higher education.
And focus on higher education, yeah. From your experience of let's say, the promotions panel, did they adopt that sort of definition, or is that something you have to influence?
A little bit of both. So what I suggest is that you look at your own institutional criteria. Now, I've looked at about 60 of these so far. I have spent quite a lot of time looking at these. They are quite different, but they all have certain components that are in common. So leadership, reach, and impact, absolutely the three central pillars of an education focused promotion application, and they will look for that. Sometimes the promotions panel doesn't recognise that reach and impact look different in education and scholarship than they do in research. And so they start to go, I'm not seeing quartile one journals here, and I'm not seeing, H indices of 326, and I'm not seeing a £400,000 grant, and so they can grumble about that. And that's fine. I think what you need to do partly is to say in your promotions application, why, tell them this is reach. My blog was read by 73 million people, and that's reach, because they won't recognize it if their research is on the panel. So that's one thing to do, is to make sure you really spell it out. I have reach, I have impact, I have profile, I can show leadership. The other thing is to work with your university around this and have those conversations, and probably not just you. PVC educations tend to be quite open to these conversations, and in fact usually looking for allies that they can work with to help influence this. In some universities where there isn't senior staff already who are teaching focused, then they bring in an external person. So I'm a panelist on some university promotions applications. Build your network, because then your referee or your assessor will be able to say, yeah, that looks like reach and impact to me. Yeah, even though it might not look like pounds publication and PhDs to a researcher on the panel. So it's about working on different levels. It's about making your case really explicit and spelling it out to the numpty on the panel who won't understand it. Yeah. And literally writing it like that. You've got to show your workings, as it were, but also do start to influence, do start to disrupt, and yeah, get people to come and talk about this and talk about what they've done around university promotions. Advance HE are about to publish a set of case studies of universities who have rewritten their promotions criteria for teaching focused colleagues. I don't know where they're at with the publications process, but I know we're in it for NTU. So that will come out on the Advance HE website at some point, and that's worth a look. And you can send it to your, Vice Chancellor or something.
I think
or
Liam next.
Hello, yeah, I'm
Hi.
one of those so I'm Liam Hill,
Hi, Liam.
University of Edinburgh. I'm a bit of an imposter because I'm in a school of education, but I
That's
am
all
a
right.
psychologist, I promise. Cool, yeah. No, thanks. It's really, really interesting talk. I kind of probably wanted to jump in just before Robin, because some of the things I wanted to say kind of really Anka and Jamie I really resonated with, because I had that similar kind of anxiety about a lot of good. So I'm really interested in quantitative research methods, open science, these sorts of things, and a lot of these things have already been done really well. But I guess I had two thoughts on that. One was kind of based just on Anka and Jamie's discussion here, is I do think there is something about looking at practice, and we often look at the early adoption of practice, like people like Glasgow who've done it really well, like you say, and other things. But there's a lot of late adopters or not yet adopters, and what does it take on that curve of culture change to get into that big meaty kind of shift of everyone? And I think we've certainly, with a few colleagues at a previous institution, we thought about that. We didn't go anywhere with it, but that kind of idea of actually, yes, there are some things like rubrics and what haven't that are used widely, but why haven't they infiltrated into some areas of academia whilst they've been highly adopted in others? I think I'd want to know that. That's an interesting question.
Absolutely. And then if you've been in a late adopter and you've managed to get that movement, how did you do it? Because if I'm still stuck in a university that won't budge, I really want to know how you got there.
Barriers, facilitators, behavior change, all this kind of stuff. We do all that, don't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing was, and I think thinking again about that sticky problem of like, how do I do something new? Which, again, I was a teaching and research focused lecturer for about 10 years. And then I thought about leaving academia entirely and decided actually I'd give it another go somewhere else in a slightly different school in a teaching focused role, which started last year. So that kind of, but I think I recognize a similar tension to when I was a researcher, like how do you do something new? How do you do something novel in a space that's already highly researched? And one thing, again, being interested in open science that you see quite a lot is actually what is the robustness of the evidence for certain practices when you dig underneath it, and what actually is the advantage of a network like this like a multi-lab approach to evaluating teaching practices. Well, these are exactly the kind of networks that can help us do this sort of thing, look across multiple institutions, where it works, where it doesn't work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, that point about, you know, things that have been accepted as general good practice. So the praise sandwich, which has a less polite name as well in assessment and feedback research. Yeah, you all know what I'm talking about, right? Say something nice to your student, tell them what they did wrong and criticize them terribly, and then tell them something nice again. Naomi Winston at the University of Surrey showed that there's no evidence base for that model of delivering feedback at all, and launched a whole portfolio, a whole program of research around what effective feedback looks like and feedback receptivity. So yeah, why are we still seeing feedback sandwiches, praise sandwiches in feedback? No idea. What else are we doing? Katie, your wonky blog on retrieval practice. Yeah, why are we saying to students, no, we're not going to test you a lot? Why don't we, you know, one of the things that's really bugging me at the moment, and I haven't had time to do anything about it because magpies get too busy. But I'm really frustrated with the talk about things like maths anxiety and exam anxiety. And I'm not belittling that and not trivializing it. I know that some students are utterly non-functional in the face of that kind of anxiety to do with exams, to do with stats, whatever it might be. Some of them genuinely are absolutely terrified of it, and it's life-changing. Mostly, we mean that people are nervous and worried about doing maths or presenting or doing an exam, and then we're using a medical term. Why are we using a medical term? You know, this is something that I think we need to look at. Are we creating maths anxiety by talking about maths anxiety when we really mean being a bit worried and underconfident, and we can support you with that, you know? But we have to use the medical word anxiety. Really bugs me. That's something that's up for exploration and investigation in our everyday lives. Yeah. Louise.
Yeah, it's a totally different question, if I may. So I'm interested in why are we what is there, and do you perceive there to be a difference between scholarship of learning and teaching and learning and teaching research? Because you might argue that research is about conducting systematic work with real world impact. So how is there a difference, do you think? And could we call some of it research?
So
Or is it always scholarship?
I think scholarship is bigger than research. So I think research is we know what research is. We start out with a research question, we do something, we measure if it works or not, and then we report it. Yeah, and that's research. And that would fit as educational research or pedagogic research. And Tierney talks a lot about all sorts of different sort of breaking downs of different types of education and pedagogy research. But scholarship, I think, has more to it than that. So I think scholarship has things like, you know, so I've just written a textbook. I've been thinking about how to make psychology useful, valuable, and engaging for my students using psychological literacy as a framework. So I've written a textbook about how would I get this across to my students and how do I teach it? That's scholarship as well, because it's still about higher education, it's still public, it's still peer reviewed, and it's still influencing other people's practices. Yeah. I think scholarship is about things like being involved in subject benchmark working groups. I think, and influencing the curriculum that we're teaching across the UK. I think scholarship is about sharing your teaching resources and materials, and that's not research. So I think research is one bit of this, and scholarship actually is quite a broad umbrella term that covers a lot. And scholarship of teaching and learning, SOTL, is one small part of scholarship as well. And I've gone bigger than SOTL. And part of that is because university criteria differ so much. And because actually people who are new to education focused careers often come in, if you start a lectureship where you're T&R, you come in with your PhD, you've done research before, you've done your apprenticeship, and then you get to do a research career and you kind of know what you're doing and you've been to conferences with your supervisor and you've got a mini network already. If you start doing teaching focused work, you've never learned to do that. Nobody ever gave you a 3-year apprenticeship to do scholarship or SOTL or pedagogic research or any of those things. And so I think for colleagues who are just getting started, this idea that, oh, I'm a physicist on an education focused career track and I've got to learn to do pedagogic research in order to be promoted, that's really hard because they don't necessarily know how to do social science research or, even how to read that stuff or where to find it. So actually opening it up and making it broader to me is a much more inclusive way to go. And then it's easy because you start saying, well, not easy, but you say, how can I turn my teaching into an output? And then how can I evaluate that output to see if it really works? And gradually you're starting to do more and more that looks like SOTL or PEDAR or educational research, but you're also getting outputs that are much more practical and valuable than that. So yeah, Anna, I agree.
Okay,
It's exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
I've put a link in the chat to it's a funded project from the Association of National Teaching Fellows, which we've called the Scholarship Spotlight. And I've linked you to the What is Scholarship page, and you can have a look at that. It's under development, so you will see things that say, we will add links, and there are instructions to us to add some links, but we haven't yet. But there's some interesting stuff there that you can have a look at and explore, and it will get better. And feel free to get in touch and be part of that.
Thanks, Julie. Yes, that website is really helpful. I pointed all my TNS colleagues to it in Cardiff, and they've said the same as well. So I think it seems we're coming at the end in terms of questions. I'm sure Julie would be happy if you contacted her separately afterwards as well, if you had any further questions. But I thought I'd just take the last 5 minutes to kind of get a feel for what you're hoping to get out of this network. Compared to how Louise and I have visualized it. Is that really what everyone wants? Is there something we've missed that could be helpful to this community? And whether you'd like to contribute as well. So feel free to kind of pop in the chat, like a mini talk about what your area of interest is or something that you've battled with. So, thinking about some of these things that Julie's been talking about, is there something you could share with this network that we could then pick up and take into our institutions? And then you can tick that off on your on your promotions application or anything like that to really kind of start to reach out to broader networks as well. Currently the network is mostly national, so we have about 50 institutions in the UK currently represented, which is amazing, but we have interest from internationally as well, so from Australia so far. But if you know anyone in Europe or anywhere that might find this network interesting and helpful, obviously we're going to record future this one and future meetings, so they can be kind of international as well. I think we have a speaker coming from America in a couple of months. The website, we're going to keep updated with all our future events. Our next one's going to be in January, on January the 22nd, 12:30 till 2.
It's on
and
the
we will.
website.
Sorry,
It's on the
Louise?
website.
It is, yes, on the website. We're so organized. Yeah, so we'll keep the website up to date, and we will keep circulating things via the mailing list. If there's anything you want to share via the mailing list as well, I'm pretty sure you could just do that by typing in the TFun network. So feel free, if you want to message everyone on the network and just say, oh, I really want to know more about X. Is anyone working on that? Has anyone done any work on that? If so, can you email me or something like that? Just feel free to use this network as a way to connect with other people. And to, if you want to share something, even just to reach out to other people on the network, it's already quite big. I'm quite happy that we've got a lot of interest, and I think that speaks to that there's a lot of need for this sort of thing, and what Julie's been talking about, and networking and supporting one another, that is lacking at the minute, and we do need to do more to really help each other. And build some of these communities of practice and start solving some of the issues that we face in higher education. But yeah, Anka, did you want to come in with a question?
A little comment, really. I wonder if there's mileage in having, like, once the network is a little bit more established and we kind of know what we're about a little bit more, whether there's mileage in putting on at conferences, at higher education conferences, TFun type workshops. So that are branded, your network, so that we can kind of get that reach beyond psychology, because a lot of what we do in psychology is informed not only by pedagogic research, but also by our psychological expertise.
Yeah.
I think that would be a really powerful thing to take to some of the big conferences in pedagogy research.
Yeah. And we've already had contact as well from APT, I think they're called, who want to work with us on transitions to university, so from A levels and so on. So I think as a network, we're going to hopefully do lots of exciting things, and this is just the beginning. And yeah, any ideas, do feel free to reach out to myself or Louise, and we'd be more than happy to discuss these things. Tom, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Just quickly, thanks very much for organising this and for the presentation. It's been so amazing and inspiring. I really appreciate it. And I just thought, just to sort of comment about like what sort of further things we could do, it'd be quite cool. I've noticed there's just like lots of wonderful things in the chat, and I think it'd be really cool to have a space, maybe like a Padlet or a Google Doc or something like that, where we could post ideas of interest and a little bit about ourselves, so that we could like further the networking and the interest and that sort of thing.
Yes, that's a very good idea. I do not have access to Padlet.
Oh, I do.
And I don't think Louise does either, because that was our initial idea as well. Yes, everyone can post a little bio on there, and then you can contact people who are, oh, I'm another cognitive psychologist interested in X, and I'm a social psychologist interested in X. So yeah, maybe like you say, Google Doc or some other resource we could maybe use to kind of get that information together. Because I think, like you say, that would be a really useful resource for people to have. Or like I say, can use the email to bombard people. Is there anyone who does this? Yes, but thank you very much for that.
There's a pedagogic research project in this, Katie. What do teaching-focused psychology academics want from a network?
There we go. And it's an
ethics form, data collection through a Padlet or a Google form or something, and then write it up.
Yeah. Fabulous. So I think we're coming up to time. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for joining the network. I really hope that this session has been useful. I'm sure it has. No, Julie's absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much to Julie for giving up the time to come and talk to us about, scholarship and teaching focused careers more broadly. Louise, was there anything you wanted to finish up with? No?
But we'll share slides and the link next week.
Lovely. Thanks again, everyone. Take care. Have a
Thank
lovely
you.
weekend and a great
to
Christmas
you all.
break. Manage to get some rest. That's going to happen,
Bye,
right?
everyone. Bye. Bye.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
I'm just going to stay on for a sec.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
I was doing as well.
Going to end the recording, Louise.
Yes.